So, some interpretive considerations. One, the many little horns and the little horn pattern. The many little horns and the little horn pattern. Can someone read Daniel 8, verse 9? Let's read for context. Start in verse 5. Good. So we see, here's another little horn, right? And can someone read verse 21 to find out who the goat is and who the little horn is? As for the horn that was broken in pieces, of which the four others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from the nation, but not with his power. At the latter end of the kingdom, when the transgressors have reached a limit, a king of a bold face who understands the riddle shall arise. His power shall be great, but not only his power, but he shall cause fear and destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men, and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand. With his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy man, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hands. The vision of the evening and the morning that has been told is true. Seal the vision, for it refers to many days from now. No, you're right. Yeah, the great horn is the first king. Then 4 horns come out of it, and then there's a little horn. Okay, you're right. So the little horn is not identified, but we do see that there's a great horn that's identified as the king. 4 horns come out of it, and there's a little horn. And we'll look at Daniel 8 in a second. Good, very good question. Good observation of the text. We'll get to Daniel 8 soon, but I think the little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus the 4th Epiphanes. The similar language used in Matthew 24, 1 Thessalonians 2, and Revelation 13. So look at Matthew 24, verse 15. And then in Revelation 13, I think we see similar language here as well. I think the point is that there's a pattern of little horns. We see a similar pattern of abominations of desolation. Could someone read Daniel 9:27? And then someone can read Daniel 11:31. In the Greek Empire, Antiochus the 4th Epiphanes. How many of you guys have read the first Maccabees chapter that I gave you already? Here's what's said in 1 Maccabees about Antiochus the 4th Epiphanes. Can someone read this? So this is a description of what happened when Antiochus Epiphanes came to the temple. Antiochus Epiphanes called himself Theos. He declared himself to be God. And then he stood in the temple of God. That sounds like another text, doesn't it? He slaughtered 40,000 Jews. You'll read this in 1 Maccabees when you read it. And he plundered the temple. He tore up the Torah manuscripts, right? And then he sacrificed a pig as on the altar of burnt offering in the temple. Now for the Jews, the pig was an unclean animal. And he sprinkled the blood all over the holy grounds. And then he erected an idol of Zeus in the temple. I mean, there might not be a stronger way of saying your temple and your God are defeated than that. So then, this had already happened by the time of Jesus, right? But Jesus still says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. I think Jesus, while the Daniel prophecy of the abomination of desolation was already fulfilled, at least in Antiochus Epiphanes, Jesus sees the pattern happening again in the destruction of Jerusalem. When Titus comes and he sacrifices a pig again. And more on that when we get to Matthew. But the pattern happens again. What I'm saying is there's the pattern. Little horn pattern, the pattern of the abomination of desolation. And lastly, the pattern of Babylon. So because Babylon is the head of the statue in Daniel 2, the New Testament writers still refer to Rome, which is the feet, as Babylon. She who is at Babylon, who is also likewise chosen, sends you greetings. And this is likely how Babylon is used by John in Revelation. So again, while the Daniel prophecy is already fulfilled about Babylon, it's still happening again. There's a sense in which it's happening again. Again, more when we get to Matthew. So the identity of the little horn in Daniel 7. So what does he speak? He speaks out against the Most High. Verse 7:25. And can someone read 2 Thessalonians 2:4? And then Revelation 13:5-6, we already saw that. He speaks blasphemies against God, right? So that's what he does. The duration is a time, and half a time. That's how long he does it. A time, and half a time. The Revelation 13 text is helpful by saying 42 months, 3.5 years. So it seems like a time would be 1 year, a times would be 2 years, and half a time would be half a year. So 3.5 years, 42 months. It's referred to as 1,260 days in Revelation 11 and Revelation 12. All three of these refer to 3.5 years. 3.5 years. Antiochus Epiphanes laid siege to Jerusalem for 3.5 years and conquered it. And then he set up his throne in Jerusalem. Nero persecuted the church leading up to 70 AD, and that lasted for 3.5 years as well. So the identity of the little horn. I'll give you 5 perspectives. There's 5 perspectives I can give you. I mean, we could do more. There's a lot of thoughts about who the little horn is. So the dispensational view, the all-futurist view, is the little horn is a future Antichrist. A future Antichrist. The 10 horns that he comes out of is a revived Roman Empire, likely the European Union. Because Italy's in Europe. Yeah, so it's a view that says it's kind of a revived Roman Empire coming out of the ashes of Rome. Out of the 10 nations of a revived Roman Empire, 3 will resist the rule of the Antichrist. 3 will say no, not following. He's going to conquer them. So then there's only 7 left, right? He's going to change the laws, which refers to changing sacrificial laws in a future Jewish temple. And he persecutes Israel for 3.5 years during the first 7 years of the tribulation, or during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. Next, there's the preterist completely fulfilled view. This was John Calvin's view. So John Calvin thought that the little horn represented the line of Caesars, all the Caesars. The 10 horns are the 10 providences of the Roman Empire. 3 horns represent the Roman Senate, from which the line of Caesars came. Remember, Rome started as a city-state, and the Caesars took power. It was no longer the republic that it had begun as. The blasphemies correspond to their claims to deity, right? So they claim to be the Son of God. They claim to be divine. Wearing down the saints is the Roman persecution of the church. Change in laws refers not to ceremonial laws, but change to common laws, setting themselves up. For example, they changing the calendar to revolve around themselves. In the months of the year, referring to Roman emperors, Augustus, Julius, things like that. The time, and half a time is a symbolic period of persecution that God cuts short, Matthew 24, indicating it's not a full 7 years, right? It's not a full 7 years. That was John Calvin's view. Preterist view number 2. The little horn is Herod the Great. Herod the Great. The 10 horns are the 10 Caesars. Herod the Great seduced the 3 horns, 3 Roman emperors, to give up more and more of their territory to Herod. And he speaks against the Most High. Look at Acts 12:20-25. Remember this story? And then wearing down the saints would just refer to the persecutions that we find in earlier in Acts, especially Acts chapter 12. Changing the times and the laws would refer to changing God's plan to set up Christ as king. Time, and half a time refers to Nero's persecution. Historicist view. The historicist views the 10 horns as the Roman Empire, which, do you remember how many kingdoms the Roman Empire divided into? 10. Yeah, eventually 10. 2 initially, but eventually 10, after it's fallen in the late 400s. The little horn is the papacy. The 3 horns are the Roman Empire, that was composed of 3 states that were conquered and incorporated into it. Speaking out against the Most High is the papacy's claim to be the vicar of Christ. Wearing down the saints is the persecution of faithful Christians by the Roman Catholic Church. Change in times and law, if it's the church, what do you think that refers to? The holy days, Roman holy days, or the Roman Catholic Church holy days, like forcing those onto people. Time, and half a time is from the 400s to the French Revolution. The 400s to the French Revolution, which marked a significant decline in the power of the papacy. No, so preterist would be, it's all fulfilled in our past. Historicist would be, it's kind of fulfilled throughout church history, but on cyclical ways. Like they correspond to specific events throughout church history. Yeah, it's chronological. Yeah, the historicist is chronological. The preterist, in some ways the preterist is too, but not in all ways. The idealist view is the cyclical view. It's always happening throughout all of church history. The 10 horns are likely the 10 kingdoms that grew out of Rome. The little horn, there are many little horns throughout history, but there's going to be one little horn at the end of history. Time, and half a time refers to all of church history. You find yourself persuaded by any of those? Why don't you talk to the person next to you? What do you think? What's this referring to? Okay. Does anyone have it all figured out, or are you just like, are you realizing how incredibly complicated this is? Yeah. The historicist sees a one-to-one prophecy fulfillment in history, right? So the horn is the papacy. The idealist is like, yeah, there's a lot of little horns. Yeah, there's just patterns. It's impossible to say this is that. This is these kind of thing. I'll give you my view. This is not something I'm super dogmatic on. This makes sense to me. I might be different in a year. I don't know. I think the little horn clearly in the text comes out of the 4th kingdom. Comes out of the 4th kingdom, and Jesus receives his dominion at the time of the 4th kingdom. And the saints of the Most High receive the kingdom in the time of the 4th kingdom. I think there's a little horn pattern that we've already observed. There's continuing little horns to today. However, the little horn in this text, I think, is Nero. I think it's Nero. So while there continues to be little horns throughout the rest of church history that follow this pattern that I showed, Antiochus IV, Nero, Matthew 24, 2 Thessalonians 2, I'm not done, don't worry. I think this prophecy is of Nero Caesar. So I don't see a text which would lead me to say that this little horn happens in the future. I think Matthew 24 refers to an abomination of desolation, and we'll get to Matthew 24. I think that most likely refers to Titus, who destroyed the temple in the Jewish war following the pattern of Antiochus' 4th Epiphanes. I think Revelation 13 likely refers to the little horn pattern throughout all of history. I think 2 Thessalonians 2 either refers to Nero, the little horn of Daniel 7, or an end times man of lawlessness. And I lean towards the second, an end times man of lawlessness. But it's a very difficult text. Very, very difficult text. The saints of the Most High, they receive the kingdom as the king receives the kingdom in verse 18. When the king receives the kingdom, the saints of the Most High receive the kingdom. The little horn makes war against them and prevails over them in verse 21. And they're ultimately vindicated by God in the judgment in verse 22. I don't think so, no. I think the judgment is the same as the judgment in verses 11 and 12, when dominion was taken away. And I think that happens during the time of the 4th beast. What are the courts? I'm not sure what the courts are, but it's the same language that's used. Dominion is taken away from him. I think the judgment that's executed against him is when he's killed and his body is destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. Yeah, his authority. It's Genesis 1:28 language. His dominion's taken from him and given to the Son of Man that approaches the Ancient of Days in verse 13 and 14, which happens at the time of the fourth kingdom. I think it just refers to his authority to reign. So in verse 12, as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I think that refers to the fact that their authority was taken away, given to the Son of Man, but their kingdoms continue to exist, but not in like a world-conquering, show dominion, Genesis 1:28 kind of way. That dominion is given to the new Adam, the Son of Man, who spreads his kingdom. But not in the, I don't think in the same way as these kinds of beasts did. Not in a world-conquering kind of way. But I don't think that's what this is talking about. I don't think this is talking about the ability to rule or kingship in general. I think it's just, and that's why it says their lives are prolonged for a season at a time. Their lives were prolonged for a season at a time, I think, accounts for everything you're saying. It's a good question, though. Daniel is hard to understand. Daniel is not the text you go to form all of your eschatology, right? Daniel is very hard to understand. Apocalyptic and prophecy are not equal. Not all prophecy is apocalyptic, and not all apocalyptic is prophecy. We saw that in the first two beasts here. Nebuchadnezzar was in the past. The Medes and the Persians were in the past, right? It's just apocalyptic is just a different style of literature. Yeah, it's symbolic. Yeah, that's right. Apocalyptic is symbolic. That's exactly right. Good. Yeah, I think this prophecy is about a little horn that was Nero. But I think that the presence of the little horn in the Daniel 7 text indicates there's more than one little horn. I'm talking about the little horn in Daniel 7. The little horn in Daniel 8 is a completely different person because it's during the Greek Empire. So like there's significant persecution, political opposition and persecution of the church. That is a little horn in the little horn pattern that I think Revelation 13 allows for. Revelation 13, I think, is describing the whole church age. And we'll get to Daniel 9 to tell you why I think that. But I think that it's a pattern of little horn and Antiochus Epiphanes that had the abomination of desolation. Nero, Titus that had the abomination of desolation, and the man of lawlessness at the end of time, I think, with the end times apostasy. I think the end times apostasy in 2 Thessalonians 2 is the same as the rebellion at the end of, or in the middle of Revelation 20. Like there's an apostasy that happens. Probably. It might refer to Nero. I doubt it. I think it refers to an end-time rebellion. Daniel 8. I'm not going to spend as much time here. I think it's interesting the way that the prophecy of Daniel 8 is fulfilled, and it helps us know how to understand it. This is a prophecy about the third beast. In the last vision, the fourth beast was the focus. That was Rome, and this one is the third beast, which is Greece. In short, Alexander the Great conquers the Medes and the Persians, which was in Daniel's future, our past. He died and leaves his kingdom to 4 generals. Look at verses 21 through 22. Can someone read that of Daniel 8? But not with his power. So Alexander the Great dies, leaves his kingdom to 4 generals. So out of the 4 horns comes the little horn then. Antiochus IV, who calls himself God, Antiochus Epiphanes. In verse 10, he tramples the stars, referring to the Jews, which is when Antiochus captured Jerusalem and he killed 40,000 people in 3 days. 40,000 people in 3 days. And in verses 11 and 12, he takes away the sacrifices and destroys the sanctuary. Here's a section from 1 Maccabees. Can someone read this, verses 20 through 28? Okay, can someone read this one? We already read the abomination of desolation text. So in verse 14, an angel says this is going to happen for 2,300 days. So option 1 is that that's 6 years. Option 2 is it refers to 2,300 morning and evening sacrifices, which is probably right. So there's 2 sacrifices a day, which is 3 years, which is equal to the time that Antiochus laid siege to Jerusalem. 3 years. In verse 25, he dies, but not by human hands. You know how Antiochus Epiphanes died? With a fever. And note when this happens. Look at verse 17. When does this happen? Yeah, so this happens at the time of the end. Which again is referring to, it refers to more than one time. It doesn't just refer to the end of human history. So this happened at the time of the end. The 2,300 sacrifices were put to an end when Judas Maccabeus recaptured Jerusalem. He cleansed the temple, and he restored the sacrifices. And you can read more about that if you read 1st and 2nd Maccabees, which I recommend you do. If you read 1st and 2nd Maccabees, it helps significantly. So Daniel 9. I want you to read in your groups Daniel 9, 24 through 27. Daniel 9, 24 through the end of the chapter. And then try to figure out what's going on there. This is why we have the analogy of faith, right? Like, these texts are just hard. Now, Daniel 9, though, is very important. Daniel 9, 24 to the end is very important. It's perhaps the most significant text for dispensationalists. Here's what the dispensationalists derive from Daniel 9. 1, separate program for Israel in the church. There's a gap in God's plan for Israel and his dealings with Israel. That comes from this text. There's a future period of intense tribulation that's exactly 7 years long, during which the divine program for Israel will resume. Okay? The rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem is from this text. And the emerging of a personal antichrist who will establish a 7-year covenant with Israel, reinstitute Levitical sacrificial system, only to break the covenant after 3.5 years. That all comes from this text. This is perhaps the most important text for dispensationalists, which is why we're going to cover it. It's also an incredibly difficult text. So I'll give you the dispensational interpretation of Daniel 9, 24 through 27. Daniel 9, 24, there are 70 sevens. This refers to 70 groups of 7 years, which is 490 years. So does your Bibles have 70 weeks? Yeah, 70 weeks. Look at your footnote, or sevens. So it's 70 groups of sevens. So the word for seven, the word for week, right? It's just saying there's 70 groups of 7. So the dispensationalists read that as 70 groups of 7 years, which is 490 years. So verse 25, these 490 years began at the decree to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem in Nehemiah 2, 1 through 8. Can someone read that for us? Nehemiah 2, 1 through 8. So this is Artaxerxes telling Nehemiah, go and rebuild the temple and the walls, or Ezra's the walls, Nehemiah's the temple, right? So this happened in around 445, 444 BC. We know from secular documents. 483 years later, assuming a year is 360 days according to the Jewish calendar, is April 6th, AD 32. So the purpose then of the 70 weeks is to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness. And that is not completed. So dispensationalists would say there's 69 of the 70 weeks are done, there's 1 week left, and that is when all of these things are completed, at the end of the 70th week. So there's a gap, right? There's 483 years, the first 69 weeks, the first 69 group of 7 years has been fulfilled. 7 more years remain in the future, and that's the time of persecution, in which the Antichrist comes. He makes a covenant with Israel, reinstitutes sacrifice, builds a temple, and God resumes his plan with Israel again. So this plan was interrupted for dispensationalists when the kingdom didn't come. Right? Jesus came, the kingdom didn't come. Instead, the kingdom was rejected. Christ was killed. God's not working with the Gentiles until Christ comes back, until the Antichrist, until the rapture happens, and then God gets the church out, starts working with Israel again. Antichrist comes, makes a strong covenant with many. Halfway through the 70th week, he puts an end to sacrifices, he breaks the covenant, and he starts a massive persecution against the Jews. Then Jesus comes back at the end of the last 3.5 years. So there's a gap between the 69th and 70th week. 2 events will occur during this gap: the death of the Messiah and the destruction of Jerusalem. The 70th week, there'll be a great tribulation, verse 27. The prince and he who makes a strong covenant refer to the personal Antichrist who will rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And when Jesus returns, he'll destroy the Antichrist and usher in the millennium. That's one problem, is that Daniel groups these groups of 7s into 3 and not into 2. So I don't think you can get directly from the text these groups of separating just the 2. Yeah, I think that's a problem. I'll propose a different interpretation, the year of Jubilee interpretation. Or I guess before, any other thoughts about the dispensational interpretation? Okay, the year of Jubilee interpretation. To understand this, we have to understand the context of Daniel 9. The context of Daniel 9. Daniel is praying in light of Jeremiah 25, 11 through 12, and Jeremiah 29, 10 through 11. So what's prophesied here by Jeremiah?
After 70 years, they will be brought out.
That's right, yeah. They'll be gone out of the land for 70 years. Look at Daniel 9, 1 through 2. Can someone read that? This is the context. You have to understand Jeremiah's prophecy, a 70-year exile prophecy, to understand what's happening in Daniel 9. Daniel 9, 1 and 2. Okay, do you see that? Do you see the connection? Get your brains working. This is, you gotta stick with me. But in short, Jeremiah says, 70 years you'll be exiled. Daniel sees the Babylonians being destroyed, and this is in the first year of the reign of Darius, the first king of the Medes and the Persians. Things are coming together, right? Things are coming together. He's getting to the end of the 70 years. Babylon has been destroyed, and Daniel decides to pray in light of the Jeremiah prophecy. Does it make sense? Now we have to understand is the whole context of the prayer is covenant. The whole context of the prayer is covenant, okay? So verse 4, O Lord, great and awesome God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love. See how many times L-O-R-D in all caps, as the covenant name of God is used here. Verse 8, to us, O Lord, belongs open shame, to our kings, to our princes, and our fathers, because we have sinned against you. Why is he confessing the sins and the sins of his people? Why is he confessing sins? Yeah, covenant. And why were they kicked out of the land? They broke covenant. We'll see specifically which command it was that caused them to be kicked out of the land. Verse 10, we have not obeyed your voice of the Lord your God by walking your laws. We transgressed your laws and turned aside. And the curse and the oath that are written in the book of the law of Moses has come upon us. Verse 13, in the law of Moses, all the calamities have come upon us. Verse 15, O Lord, our God, who brought your people out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand and have made a name for yourself, as at this day we have sinned, we have done iniquity. Verse 20, while I was speaking and praying and confessing the sins of my people Israel and presenting my pleas before the Lord God from the holy hill of my God, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in a vision at first, came to me in swift flight at the end of the evening sacrifice. He made me understand, speaking to me and saying, O Daniel, I have come out to give you insight and understanding. At the beginning of your pleas for mercy, a word went out, and I have come to tell you, for you are greatly loved. Therefore, consider the words and understand the vision. Okay, so Daniel's praying about the Jeremiah prophecy. He's confessing the sins of Israel. He's desiring to go back to the land, and Gabriel comes to say, your prayer has been heard and there's an answer. Okay. Which means the 70 weeks is in response to Daniel's prayer, and it's in response to the Jeremiah prophecy of the 70 years. Does that make sense? So why 70 years? Why 70 years? Strap on your pew belts, okay? Strap on your pew belts. Here we go. I want you to read Leviticus 25, 1 through 12 together. Read Leviticus 25, 1 through 12. Josh, why are we going to Leviticus? Trust me. Trust me, trust me, trust me. 25, 1 through 12. Read those together. Okay, so what's commanded in this text? What's commanded in this text? Well, before that, what's the sabbatical year? So the sabbatical year, so every 7 years the land was supposed to rest, right? Every 7 years the land was supposed to rest. And every seven years, right? So every 49 years was a celebration of the year of Jubilee. Leviticus 25, 8, you shall count 7 sevens, right? You'll count 7 sevens. You'll count 7 weeks. Do you see the Daniel language here? So the point is that Israel needed to let the land rest once every 7 years, and then there was a year of Jubilee year, which was the 49th year, every 49 year, every 7 sevens. So the perfect number of the sabbatical years, right? 7 sevens is the rest, the year of rest. That's right. That's right. Yeah. The 49th year is the year of rest. And it culminates in the year of Jubilee. Yeah, the year of Jubilee is the celebration. Thank you. Okay. One more Leviticus text. Leviticus 26, 40 through 45. So what's the penalty for not observing the 7 years rest in the year of Jubilee? What's the penalty? Exile. If you don't observe the year of Jubilee, and if you don't observe the Sabbath, the sabbatical years, you will be exiled so that the land can rest. Right? Okay. One more text. 2 Chronicles 36. This is where it all comes together. 2 Chronicles 36, 10 through 23. I think you'll find the exile because of the failure to observe the sabbatical year, Jeremiah's 70 years, and the end of the exile with Jeremiah's 70 years also, and Cyrus's decree. I think you'll find all of these here. Go and read them together and see where you find them. 2 Chronicles 36, 10 through 23. What do you see? We've read these 3 texts. What's going on? Help me understand what's going on. How did they sin? In what way did they sin? Yeah, they didn't let the land rest. They did not do the year of Jubilee. They did not observe the rest years for the land. So that was the reason in these texts. It's not just any old sin. It's that sin in particular. Good. Exactly, yeah. So why does Jeremiah say you'll be exiled for 70 years? For the land to rest. That's exactly right. For the years that they did not let the land rest. So then, at the end of the 70 years, Cyrus, king of Persia, comes and sends them back. Cyrus, king of Persia, takes over Babylon and sends them back into the promised land. Just like Jeremiah said. Now that's incredibly important for me for understanding this. Because I think what that means is Cyrus's decree marks 2 events. One, it marks the end of the exile, according to Jeremiah's 70 years. And 2, it marks the beginning of Daniel's 77s. I think they have to go together. Because otherwise you have a division. Otherwise, the Daniel's 77s don't fulfill Jeremiah's 70 weeks, which creates a problem. Well, I think we have to understand Gabriel's response to Daniel as an answer to Daniel's prayer. Right? Daniel's praying in light of Jeremiah. Gabriel comes and says, we've heard your prayer. Here's the answer to it, 77s. Okay? So 605 BC, Daniel was deported to Babylon. This is the beginning of the 70 years. Okay? 539 BC, Babylon falls to Cyrus of Persia. Daniel prays between 539 and 538 BC in response to Cyrus taking over. Cyrus's decree is in 538 BC. At the end of Jeremiah's 70 weeks. King Artaxerxes, which is when the dispensationalists say the 70 weeks of Daniel starts, is not until 445 to 444, almost 100 years later. So it seems odd that Gabriel's answer to Daniel's prayer wouldn't happen for almost another 100 years. He comes to answer his prayer, but the 70 weeks won't start for another 100 years. And the additional 70 weeks of Jeremiah's prophecy, it would be separated from the first 70 weeks by almost 100 years also, right? You sticking with me? So what I'm arguing for is that Cyrus's decree and not Artaxerxes' decree begins Daniel's 77s. And I think that makes sense because it's in direct answer to Daniel's prayer. I don't think Gabriel's going to come to Daniel and say, well, in 100 years from now, right? Moreover, Artaxerxes' decree in Nehemiah 2, 1 through 8, all it does is confirm what Cyrus already put in place. Cyrus already put in place the decree to go back and rebuild. Artaxerxes confirms that. So and what's the angel? What's the angel that comes and speaks to Daniel? Gabriel. What else do we see Gabriel doing in the Bible that's significant? Yeah, it comes to Mary. It's similar language too. What does he call Daniel? Greatly loved. So I think from the outset, we should interpret the answer to this prayer to be about Jesus. I think we should interpret it to be about Jesus and not about a personal antichrist. Can someone read this quote from Voin Pothras?
The logical conclusion.
Does Cyrus' decree actually fulfill? That's what we're trying to argue. Does Cyrus' decree actually fulfill Daniel's 70 weeks? I think it does. So I think Cyrus' decree is an answer to the prayer. So we already saw Cyrus' decree to go up and build the temple in Jerusalem, right? But the question does come, doesn't this say the decree to build Jerusalem, not the temple? Well, interestingly, Isaiah describes Cyrus in this kind of language. I am he who says to Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he will fulfill my purpose, saying to Jerusalem, she shall be built, and to the temple your foundation shall be laid. Okay. Also, Isaiah 45:13. I have stirred him up in righteousness. I will make all his ways level. He shall build my city and shall set my exiles free. Not for price or reward, says the Lord of hosts. So I think Isaiah uses similar language here, is the answer to that question. That the decree to restore and build the temple is, in a sense, a decree to restore and build Jerusalem. It's confirmed by Artaxerxes, certainly. But I think Cyrus' decree fulfills the necessary conditions to begin the 70 weeks. It's a good question. And I think that because of the Jeremiah text, or because of the Isaiah text. So conclusion, the decree of Cyrus in 539 to 538 BC is both the conclusion of Jeremiah's prophecy of captivity and the beginning of Daniel's 70 weeks prophesied to restoration. Okay, so the groups of sevens in verse 25. Note they're split into three groups. Contrasting dispensationalists, as James observed earlier, they're split into two groups. See, the dispensationalists see the first two groups as a single group, and then one group of the single group of 69 weeks, and then 1 week at the end. So the first is 7 weeks, verse 25. I think it's the first Jubilee, which ends at the rebuilding of the temple under Zerubbabel and Ezra. After 7 years. Then the second 62 weeks, Messiah is supposed to come in verse 25. And the third 1 week, the Messiah is cut off. Okay, I think all in all, it's a picture of the final year of Jubilee. Okay, let me back up. Let me back up a second. So, what did the prince of the people do? What did the prince of the people do in the text? In verse 26, The people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Right? The people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Okay. So, I think the prince to come is Jesus, not the Antichrist. And I think the people of the prince are the Jews who began the temple burning in 70 AD. The Romans, not the Jews, began the temple burning in 70 AD. I'm sorry, the Jews, not the Romans, began the temple burning in 70 AD. So here's the quote from Josephus. Yeah, so I think when Daniel says, the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and its sanctuary, I think it's referring to the Jews, the people of Jesus. Its end shall come like a flood. I think that's Titus's destruction of the temple in 70 AD. So the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy it, and its end shall come like a flood, 70 AD. He shall make a strong covenant. I think he is the prince who has been Jesus in every reference so far. Okay? So I think, and the covenant that Jesus makes is the answer to Daniel's prayer. I think it's the new covenant. Jesus makes the new covenant. And note the language, it's covenantal in context. God who keeps covenant and steadfast love. Right? We have walked in transgressions. We've walked against your law. You brought your people out of the land of Egypt. I'm confessing my sins. The many, right? He confirms the covenant with the many. I think it's Isaiah 53 language. Yeah, it's Isaiah 53 language. Isaiah 53:12. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sins of many to make intercession for their transgression. Romans 5:19. As one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so by one man's obedience the many will be made righteous. Mark 10:45. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. So he puts an end to sacrifice and grain offering. Theologically, that happens when Jesus dies. The temple is torn in two. Historically, that happens when the temple is destroyed in 70 AD. Look at Hebrews 8:13. In speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. Right? The temple, the sacrifices. He puts a stop to the sacrifices. The abomination that makes desolate, what is this in reference to? Well, we're getting to Daniel, or we're getting to Matthew 24, but in short, Jesus condemns the Jewish religious leaders. He holds out his hand to Jerusalem. They would not come to him. He says, see, your house is left desolate. The abomination that makes desolation. Matthew 24:15, so when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken about Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. And Luke 21:20 is not for, Matthew's for a Jewish audience, right? Luke's not for a Jewish audience. So Luke makes it a little bit clearer. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know the desolation has come near. Referring to 70 AD. The purpose of the 70 weeks, I think, are fulfilled in Christ. They make perfect sense in light of the coming of Jesus. To finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, meaning that these visions and prophecies are fulfilled, and to anoint a most holy place, which is the church. It's the church. Yeah. So are any of these not fulfilled in Jesus is the question. Are the Jews who set the temple on fire in 70 AD.
How are the Jews the people of Christ?
In the same way that he came to his own people and his own people did not receive him in John 1.
So they stopped becoming the people of Christ.
Right, but I think it's just a reference to the Jews. It's just saying that people of his ethnicity. I don't think it's talking about the church. I think it's talking about the Jews. It's a good question. But there seems to be in the text the destruction of a temple and the anointing of a most holy place, right? So one temple is destroyed, another temple is set up, which I think describes 70 AD very well. The temple in Jerusalem is destroyed. He anoints the most holy place. I think all of these happen in Christ. He finishes transgression, puts an end to sin. He atones for iniquity. He brings an everlasting righteousness. He seals vision and prophecy, and he anoints the most holy place. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is the other possible interpretation, is that the prince is Titus, and the Romans are the ones who destroy it. The people of the prince could be the Roman armies. That's a possibility too. And that would fulfill what we see here as well. I could go either way. But it is interesting that the Jews started the fire, and they could have stopped the fire, but they chose not to stop the fire, right? I mean, that's at least interesting. It's worth asking the question anyway, I think. So what about the second half of Daniel's 70th week? I think that's describing the events of the church age. Revelation 11:2. Do not measure the court outside the temple, but leave it out, for it is given over to the nations that will trample the holy city for 42 months. Revelation 12:14. The woman was given 2 wings and the great eagle so that she should fly from the serpent into the wilderness to a place where she should be nourished for a time, and half a time, again referring to Daniel. Revelation 13:5, and the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty, blasphemous words, and was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. I think it refers to the entirety of the church age, which is the second half. So the first half of Daniel's 70 week is when the benefits of Christ come. The second half, there's an extension in the same way there was an extension to Jeremiah's prophecy, right? Jeremiah's prophecy was the return from exile, which happened physically but not spiritually. So it was predicted that it would fully happen spiritually by Daniel's 77s, which comes to its final conclusion at the end of the church age. That's right, yeah, but in the ultimate year of Jubilee is what the true Israel longed for. When they came back to the land at the end of Jeremiah's prophecy, they realized they were still in exile. They're spiritually in exile. Daniel predicts the day of return from spiritual exile. So you can be in the promised land but still be in exile, which is why Jeremiah 31 is quoted in Matthew 2. Rachel weeps for her children. They're still in exile. That's why there's baptisms in the Jordan River. They're still in exile. They're praying that God would bring them back from exile. They're praying that Daniel's 70 weeks would find their finish. That's what they're praying for. And I think Daniel predicts the day that they won't just come back from physical exile, which is what Jeremiah predicted, but spiritual exile as well, which happens in the final year of Jubilee, which Christ reads the scroll in the temple, right? Proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. The final year of Jubilee has come in Christ. I think that's what it's saying.